A hospital in Pasewalk in the north of Germany, November 1918. There's a man on a cot with bandages wrapped over his eyes. British gas caught him 3 weeks earlier, mustard gas, near Ypres. The doctors say the blindness might fade. Might. For now he lives in the dark, and he listens. On the 10th of November, a pastor comes to the ward, his voice shaking. He tells the wounded men that the Kaiser has fled, that Germany has surrendered, that the war, 4 years, 2 million German dead, is over, and Germany has lost. The man on the cot later wrote that everything went black again, that he pressed his face into the pillow, that he wept for the first time since his mother died. He was 30 years old, and he was a nobody, a corporal who ran messages between the trenches. No wife, no career, no home to speak of. 15 years after that night, he would be the master of Germany. 20, and he'd command the most powerful army on earth. His name was Adolf Hitler. And here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. He did not shoot his way in. He did not storm any palace. Germany in these years was a democracy, a real one, with elections and a constitution and loud, free newspapers. And that democracy handed itself to him almost politely, signed the forms, followed its own rules to the letter. This is the story of how you strangle a nation's freedom without ever once breaking its laws. So who was the man under the bandages? An Austrian, actually, a failed painter. Vienna's art academy rejected him twice. He drifted, sold postcards, slept in men's shelters. When the war came in 1914, he was living in Munich, and he was thrilled by it. He volunteered the first week. For the first time in his life, he belonged to something bigger than himself. He served as a dispatch runner, carrying orders through shell fire, and he was good at it. Won the Iron Cross twice, the second one, the rare first class, in August 1918. The officer who put him forward for that medal was a Jewish lieutenant named Hugo Gutmann. Hold on to that. But let's be honest about what he was, because the propaganda later buried it. He was a dependable soldier, not a war hero. His own comrades thought him strange, humorless, alone, prone to sudden rants about politics nobody had asked about. No rank, no followers, no plan. The war didn't hand him glory. It handed him a wound that never healed, and a story to explain it. Because in that hospital bed, Hitler refused to believe Germany had lost on the battlefield. He decided, and millions decided along with him, that the army had been betrayed, stabbed in the back, not by the generals, but by the politicians and socialists and Jews who'd signed the surrender, the November criminals. It was a lie. The German army was buckling in the field in 1918. The generals themselves had begged the government to seek peace. But it was a lie people wanted, because it meant they hadn't truly lost. They'd been cheated. And a man who can hand a humiliated nation someone to blame is holding a loaded weapon. Hitler picked it up. Munich after the war was chaos, and in 1919 the army sent Hitler, still a soldier, now an informant, to spy on a tiny nationalist group called the German Workers' Party, 50-odd members. He went to inform on them, and instead discovered the one thing he could do better than almost anyone alive. He could talk. He could stand in a smoke-filled beer hall and make frightened, furious people feel like an army. So he joined. Within 2 years, he was running it, He renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi for short, and gave it a flag, a raised arm salute, and a private militia of thugs in brown shirts to break up rivals in the street. And in November 1923, high on his own momentum, he tried to take power the obvious way, by force. The beer hall putsch. Hitler and his men, with the old war hero General Ludendorff at their side, tried to seize the Bavarian government and march on Berlin, the way Mussolini had marched on Rome. It was a fiasco. Police opened fire. 16 Nazis dropped dead in the street. Hitler ran, was hunted down, and put on trial for treason. That should have been the end of him. Instead, it made him, and this is where he learned the lesson that changed everything. A sympathetic nationalist judge let him give speeches from the dock for hours, and the newspapers printed every word. An unknown Bavarian rabble-rouser became a household name across Germany. He was sentenced to 5 years and served 9 comfortable months, during which he dictated a book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, spelling all of it out in advance, the hatred, the plan for conquest, the whole design. He told the world precisely what he would do. Hardly anyone believed him. When he walked out of Landsberg prison at the end of 1924, his strategy was rewritten for good. Never again the gun. As he put it, they would have to hold their noses and enter the Reichstag, the parliament, and destroy the thing from the inside, with its own doors, its own ballots, its own rules. Legally. He just needed Germany to get desperate enough to open the door. For 5 years, it didn't work. The mid-1920s were good years. The economy healed, life steadied, and nobody wanted a screaming man promising revolution. In the 1928 election, the Nazis took 2.6% of the vote, 12 seats. A fringe joke. Hitler was going nowhere. Then, in October 1929, the American stock market collapsed. The Depression rolled across the ocean like a tide going out. The American loans propping up the German economy were yanked home. Factories shut. Banks failed. By 1932, 6 million Germans were out of work, families ruined, war veterans standing in bread lines. The moderate government offered nothing but cuts, and the country began drifting to the extremes, to the communists promising to burn it all down, and to Hitler promising to make Germany great again. Now watch the numbers move. 1928, 2.6%. September 1930, 1 year into the Depression, 18%. Overnight, the second largest party in Germany. July 1932, 37%. 230 seats, the single biggest party in the entire country. In 4 years, he'd gone from a punchline to the most powerful politician in Germany, and he'd never fired a shot to do it. He had been voted there. But here's the hinge of the whole story. 37% is not a majority. Even at his peak, most Germans did not vote for him. And in a democracy, the largest party doesn't just take the throne. You need a majority, or a coalition, and the other parties would not hand Hitler the country. He demanded to be made Chancellor. The old president refused him flat out. The ballot box had carried Hitler as far as a ballot box could. It got him to the doorstep. It could not get him through the door. So somebody opened it for him. The president of Germany was Paul von Hindenburg, a stiff old field marshal, 85 years old, a living monument from the last war. He despised Hitler, called him the Bohemian corporal, wanted nothing to do with him. But around Hindenburg circled a nest of conservative aristocrats and schemers who were sure they were the real players. Chief among them, a vain ex-chancellor named Franz von Papen, nursing a grudge. And these men made the most catastrophic bet in modern history. They looked at Hitler's 37%, millions of votes they could never win themselves, and they thought, we'll use him, make him chancellor, the front man, and pack the cabinet with our people. He brings the mob. We keep the real power. Papen bragged to a friend that inside of 2 months, we'll have pushed Hitler so far into a corner that he'll squeak. Remember that line. On January 30th, 1933, they talked the old president into it. Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, legally, constitutionally, handed the office by men certain they'd boxed him in. There were only 3 Nazis in a cabinet of 12. On paper, he was surrounded, outnumbered, contained. That night, the Nazis marched through Berlin with torches, a river of fire that poured through the streets for hours. In his diary, Goebbels wrote, "It is almost like a dream." The men who thought they'd hired a puppet had 52 days left to discover what they'd actually done. Hitler was chancellor, but he was not yet a dictator. He still had a constitution over his head, a parliament that could vote him out, courts, a free press. To finish the job, he needed German democracy to kill itself with its own hand. He gave it 4 weeks. First, he called another election for March 1933 to try at last for his majority. And in the middle of that campaign, on the night of February 27th, the Reichstag itself, the Parliament building, burst into flames. A young Dutch communist was caught at the scene. Historians still argue whether the Nazis set the fire or simply got very lucky with it. It hardly matters because Hitler used it perfectly. He went to the old president and said, "This is the opening shot of a communist uprising. We need emergency powers now." The very next day, February 28th, Hindenburg signed the Reichstag Fire decree. One signature suspended the basic rights of every German: free speech, free press, the freedom to gather, protection from arrest without trial. Gone, temporarily. Overnight, the Nazis began arresting communists and opponents by the thousands. And all of it was perfectly legal. The Constitution had an emergency clause. They simply used it. Even so, the machine still wore its democratic shape. The March election went ahead, and even with his opponents in jail and his stormtroopers in the streets, Hitler's party won only 44%. He still could not win a clean majority. The German people, at gunpoint, still would not quite hand him the country. So he stopped asking them. Here is the moment it truly dies, not with a fire, with a vote. Hitler brought a law before Parliament called the Enabling Act. Stripped of its language, it did exactly one thing. It let the Chancellor and his cabinet make any law they pleased for 4 years with no Parliament, no President, even laws that shattered the Constitution. It was a bill to make the Parliament pointless, a vote to abolish voting. But amending the Constitution required a 2/3 majority, so Hitler manufactured one. The communist deputies were already under arrest or in hiding, their seats erased. He ringed the opera house where the vote was held with rows of chanting Brownshirts, so that every deputy had to walk in past a wall of men who wanted a yes. And he made promises to the moderate Catholic Party, promises he'd break within months, to pull them across. Only one man stood up. Otto Welles, leader of the Social Democrats, rose in that room full of thugs and said no to Hitler's face, that they could take his freedom and his life, but not his honor. It was the last free speech ever given in that parliament. Then they voted. 444 in favor, 94 against. The Social Democrats standing alone. And with that, on March 23, 1933, the elected representatives of the German people voted to make themselves obsolete and to hand one man the power to rule by decree. No coup, no tanks in the square, a show of hands. Democracy signed its own death warrant and thanked the man holding the pen. Everything after was just cleanup. That summer, every other party in Germany was banned or dissolved itself, legally. The next year, when Hindenburg finally died, Hitler folded the office of president into his own and had the entire army swear a personal oath, not to Germany, but to him by name. And Papen, the schemer who had promised to make Hitler squeak in a corner, he had already watched Hitler's men gun down his allies in a single bloody night and walked away with his life and nothing else. He never squeezed anyone. He'd been the doorman. So how does a failed painter, a blinded corporal weeping in a hospital, become the absolute master of Germany in 15 years? Not the way we like to picture it. There's a comforting version where evil kicks the door down and everyone gets to imagine they'd have fought. That is not what happened here. Every step, the elections, the appointment, the decree, the enabling act, was legal, constitutional, stamped, and signed. Germany did not lose its democracy in a battle. It voted and schemed and compromised its way out of one. Every player convinced he was the clever one, using the other. By the summer of 1934, there were no elections that mattered, no parliament, no free press, no one left to say no. The door had been opened from the inside and then bricked shut behind him. And a man who had told the whole world exactly what he meant to do, in a book years before, now had a nation and an army sworn to his name to do it with. Which raises the next question. What does a man like that do with a country like that? Because Hitler never wanted Germany fixed. He wanted it armed. And 1,000 miles east, a city split off by the last war, a place called Danzig, was already waiting.